Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting today. Thank you so much for honoring our invitation to attend this meeting. We are starting shortly, and I would like now, as we start, to hand over to Dr. Hugo van der Merwe, who is the moderator of this policy webinar. Dr. van der Merwe, over to you.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Anna, and good morning to everybody. I'd like to start as promptly as we have a full agenda, and we do hope to keep some time for questions and discussion. Yeah, as Anna said, my name is Hugo van der Merwe. I'm the Director of Research, Knowledge and Learning at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. And I'm moderating this webinar on violent extremism in Mozambique as a threat to peace and security in SADC. I would like to welcome our esteemed panel members and guests to this collaborative event that's hosted jointly by IJR and CSVR and supported by GIZ. My role today is purely to manage the discussion, and given the number of presenters we have on our panel, I will leave it to them to talk to the topic. All I want to do is just to emphasize three key points that I think make this so relevant. Firstly, this problem of violent extremism is one that should not be underestimated in Southern Africa, as that is what many other regions have done, and done at great cost. Secondly, this is a problem that requires unconventional responses, as we have repeatedly seen the failure of narrow military-based interventions. And thirdly, it needs to be understood as a regional challenge, as it is a set of problems that does not respect national borders. All of these serve to highlight the urgency of this webinar and the collection of speakers that we have gathered to share their expertise. I will introduce the presenters very briefly before they talk and try to manage the time we have allocated. As you will have seen on the program, we have a short session for questions and answers. Let me just start by introducing our first speaker, who just to introduce the topic and to welcome everybody present. Nomfundo Mogapi is the Executive Director of CSVR, and we welcome her to just open up this panel. Thank you, Nomfundo.
Oh, thank you everyone for having me. Apologies for that digital delay. To the members of the diplomatic community that are here present, from the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in South Africa and Mozambique, the Embassy of Zimbabwe, Embassy of Denmark, the High Commission of Canada, the Irish Embassy, the Embassy of Sweden, and any other embassies that we might not have mentioned, we welcome you. To the donor community here present, including GIZ, whose support for non-state actors' interventions in SADC have really made this meeting possible for us. To our partners in working with transitional justice, we've been working with them for the past 2 decades. The African Union Department of Political Affairs, who are also taking leadership within the African Union on transitional justice issues, to the representatives of the SADC Secretariat, who are really at the helm of addressing these issues in SADC, the academia think tanks that are here present, and our colleagues from civil society. We want to have a special mention to our partner, IJR. Their director, Stan, is also joining us, who are co-conveners of this policy webinar. A very good morning to all of you. You are welcome into this crucial webinar that we are having currently. It's important to highlight that SADC has been seen as a relatively peaceful region compared to others by those of us that work in the peace building and transitional justice field. And the issue of violent extremism that is emerging and has emerged in Mozambique is a threat not only to Mozambique, but to the SADC region as a whole. Lessons from Al-Shabaab in Somalia after Kenya, Tanzania, and the East Africa region and what has happened in relation to Boko Haram insurgency in northern Nigeria that has affected not only Nigeria, but also the Niger, Chad, and the Lake Chad and the basin countries, are a stark reminder for all of us on how conflict, insurgency, and violence cannot just only be limited to national borders, but can actually transcend other borders. So for us, this discussion is therefore timely, it is critical, and it is needed so that we can begin to find regional solutions that address both the root causes of this insurgency and the violation, but also to really begin to look at how we can address this as SADC. And this webinar is also happening at an important time when we are faced with the challenge of COVID-19. And one of the things that we've seen is that important issues of transitional justice are beginning to take the back seat because of the focus on COVID-19. And it's important for us as people in this field to keep on addressing the crucial issues of transitional justice, violent extremism, peace building, even as we respond to COVID-19, because we have seen that COVID-19 has exacerbated these issues. We are even seeing that the community and the international community that used to support us has its own challenges now. So it will really depend on us as Africans and as Southern Africans to look at these solutions together with the embassies that are within our borders who are here to support us. So from me and on behalf of CSVR and the board of CSVR, a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. We're really looking forward to a vibrant discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nomfundo. As our first speaker today is Mr. Stephen Buchanan Clark, who is a senior project leader at IJR, and he will lead us in providing a situation report based on the work of IJR in Mozambique. Stephen, over to you.
Thank you, Hugo. Before I start, I just wanted to say thank you to CSVR, the collaborating on this, to the diplomatic community for attending, my esteemed colleagues and academics who have an interest on this. I fully agree with Hugo's three sort of framing points that he raised at the top of this meeting, and I would like to reiterate each one of them. Also wanted to particularly thank the Kingdom of the Netherlands Embassy in Pretoria for supporting our project at IJR initiatives to counter violent extremism within the Southern Africa region. Like Hugo mentioned, I wasn't sure to what degree everyone involved in this meeting has been following the insurgency. So I thought the 15 minutes I've been provided, the best way to spend it would be to give a very brief sort of situation report, an overview of the insurgency, how the organization has changed over time, the responses from national, regional, and international actors to date. And then, rather than recommendations, because I don't think we're at that stage yet, rather just a few sort of framing questions that we could consider jointly. Please bear in mind, these are just the broad strokes. Like I said, in 15 minutes, my time's limited, but I have developed a sort of library, so to speak, on research into the ethnic components in northern Mozambique, transnational criminal networks, the political dimensions, and there's some Mozambican organizations like the Institute for Social and Economic Studies and Civil Society Support Mechanism Foundation, which have done some great research. And please feel free to contact me and I can advise further on those points. So firstly, Alsuna Wajama launched their first attack in October 2017 in Mosimba de Praia, Cabo Delgado. The origins of the organization are not clearly understood. However, we do have a fairly good picture. What seems most likely at this stage is that Alsuna initially emerged in Cabo Delgado as a breakaway religious sect preceding 2015. They believed that the Mozambique Islamic Council and Muslim leadership were co-opted by Frelimo, and that local Muslims were practicing a more degraded form of Islam. Group members made efforts to dissociate themselves from the state, including from state schools and courts, to establish their own sort of society. and worked to convert youth from the historically disenfranchised Mwani ethnic group and youth in the region. By 2014, for example, they had built their own mosques and were coming into fairly regular clashes with local Muslim organizations, even to the point where the Mozambique Islamic Council had reported their activity to the government on more than one occasion. While what we know of the leadership has always comprised of both nationals and foreigners from Tanzania, Somalia, Kenya, it seems that from 2015, the organization began to take on more militants, both due to their increasing involvement in smuggling and traffic operations, which probably put them into contact with more hardened jihadist organizations in southern Tanzania and elsewhere along the eastern seaboard. So since that first October attack in 2017, over the last 3 years, the group's, the organization's evolution and sophistication at attacks has evolved fairly rapidly. In 2018, for example, the group tended to focus on attacks on rural villages along the coastal regions of Cabo Delgado at a tempo of around 6 to 7 per month. This usually included bands of between 6 to 10 militants attacking villages, predominantly armed actually with machetes and axes. However, by late 2018, early 2019, the rate of monthly attacks had doubled to around 16 per month and included harder targets like security patrols. The group's tactical thinking seemed to have changed over this time, whereby simultaneous assaults would take place on multiple villages with primary and backup units. They also was the first case of Al-Sunnah using a IED to destroy a vehicle outside Pemba. Since the beginning of 2020, Al-Sunnah has launched roughly 20 attacks per month. At least 14% of these attacks on hard targets like police and military patrols, the rest on civilian soft targets. On a few occasions, they have seized towns and held them for a few days, looted police stations for weaponry, and raised the ISIS flag. Targeting and infiltrating these towns and villages, the group can instill fear in the population, restock supplies, and drive recruitments. Reports from this week indicate there are likely 5 cells now of Al-Sunnah staging attacks across Cabo Delgado province. From where the insurgency began in October 2017 in Mocimboa de Praia, it has spread south and west into other areas of the province, including Mosomia, Mitumba, Dangade, Palma, and Kisanga. So, a brief views on I think this operational evolution over the last 3 years. First, I think it indicates the insurgents are growing in confidence, look to expand their territorial hold in Cabo Delgado, probably so as to get a better tax revenue stream and to formalize their allegiance to the Islamic State Central African province. While reports indicate that members were sent to training camps as early as 2015 in Somalia, DRC, and Tanzania, it seems over the last 2-3 years, they have attracted more hardened jihadist fighters from abroad with more military experience. There are also reports that indicate defector security personnel in Mozambique and border guard joining the organization. This would probably help explain the evolution in their tactics and sophistication. They also seem to have secured additional funding streams, which has helped them strengthen their operations and are likely receiving financial support from international jihadist networks. I think it's important to understand that insurgencies, they evolve over time. You take Al-Shabaab, for example, in 2005, it started as a insurgency against the transitional federal government of Somalia and Ethiopian occupation. As Al-Qaeda elements within Al-Shabaab gained prominence within the organization, they took on a more transnational, extremist, international terrorist goals. As they secured land, they began to even develop governance structures and develop very deep illicit trafficking networks, to the point where Al-Shabaab today almost looks nothing like it did in 2005. And I think that's something we need to consider when looking at Al-Sunnah and its trajectory. Today, the death toll stands at about 1,000 people, and between 100 and 200,000 have been displaced from Cabo Delgado. So over this period, the last 3 years, what have been responses by government and international actors? Unfortunately, I think the Mozambican government has followed a course traveled again and again by many states. The government ignored red flags of growing Islamist activity in Mozambique as early as 2015, and In 2017, after the initial attacks, they were downplayed as criminal activity. After the attacks continued, there were attempts to overwhelm them by force, launching mass dragnet arrests, closing down mosques, banning journalists from the region, and holding mass trials for suspects. On one such mass trial, 221 defendants stood before the Cabo Delgado Judicial Court. 57 were sentenced to prison terms between 16 and 40 years. However, it was likely at this stage that only certain portions of Al-Sunnah were militants. But however, the government seems to have, in those actions, pitted the organization against the government, and thereby really playing into the hands of the sort of hardliners within the organization. In 2019, after government could no longer publicly deny there was a burgeoning insurgency, they sort of invoked sovereignty and claimed it was an internal matter, out of bounds or foreign interference. However, at the same time, they were hiring the services of Russian Wagner private security company, who in January suffered defeat in battle in Cabo Delgado and since retreated from the province. In 2020, the AU publicly recognized the insurgency. However, following the principle of subsidiarity, had to wait on the regional economic community to take the lead. In February, South Africa made statements acknowledging the insurgency as well as the presence of ISIS fighters, both in Mozambique and South Africa. After soliciting support from the region, only in May 2020 was the issue discussed at SADC, Extraordinary Organ Troika Summit, plus Mozambique and Harare. In addition, there's been a couple of other ad hoc responses. In 2018, the government of Mozambique sought to strengthen its counterterrorism legislation. The IOM has provided capacity building for on integrated border management. MOUs have been signed between Mozambique government, India, Egypt, Russia, and Britain for security cooperation. The AU, after formal request, is considering intelligence and military assistance. The US has also funded a number of strategic communication, dialogue initiatives, interfaith platform initiatives, and the UN ODC has facilitated a terrorism prevention engagement program. In addition, the government has continued to seek assistance from private military companies. South African-based DAG Security Group is operative there now. And reports also indicate that SANDF Special Forces are in training and may consider deployment in some capacity. However, that's not yet known. When the Minister of Defense was asked to provide details at a parliamentary portfolio committee, he declined to answer publicly. However, I think given the potential blowback for the implications of a South African deployment, at least, I think this is really something that should be discussed more broadly. So finally, as I've only got about 5 minutes left, I wanted to just put a few points of consideration on the table that hopefully esteemed colleagues can pick up on, and we can discuss a bit further. I think, you know, after 3 years, we can talk about hard counterterrorism approaches, such as targeted sanctions, clamping down illicit revenue streams, strengthening border security, intelligence sharing, military operations. And we can also talk about softer CV approaches, countering violent extremism approaches like interfaith platforms, counter-narrative programming, de-radicalization efforts. However, I think what I've found from being involved in CV projects in East Africa and Nigeria is that both hard and soft approaches to countering violent extremism, they take the responsibility off the state and the international actors and really put it on the population. And I think this is a really important point to understand. If we want to understand what generates insurgency in northern Mozambique, I don't think a detailed look at drivers of extremism and recruitment and radicalization are actually that necessary. There's exhaustive lists of drivers of extremism, and I guarantee you all of them are present in northern Mozambique. First and foremost, I think it's important to understand the material scarcity in people's lives, especially the youth, where their prospects for a future are so grim that joining and potentially dying in an insurgency is the attractive option. It is not unheard of that, you know, more well-off suburbanites are recruited and radicalized online. to join ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but that's really not what's happening, I think, in northern Mozambique. For decades, the country's provinces remain neglected, politically marginalized, and underdeveloped. I think the IMF has imposed austerity regulations, which have increased inequality and really not helped develop the country. For example, between 1996 and 2015, poverty rates in Maputo City and Maputo fell by 70%, compared to 20% reduction in the north, including Cabo Delgado. When one takes into account rising population rate in the northern provinces, it is one of the rare cases on earth, actually, where the number of people living in absolute poverty is actually growing. 60% of Cabo Delgado, people in Cabo Delgado are illiterate, 35% of children do not attend school, and just 0.3% secondary school. Thousands of youth remain unemployed, and youth unemployment is estimated as high as 88%. So if you think we can shoot our way out of this problem when 9 out of 10 youth are unemployed, I don't think that's anywhere near a viable option. For decades, citizens of Cabo Delgado have seen their region's wealth be siphoned out by government elites, multinationals, without seeing any benefit to the local economy. If anything, I think over the last decade, LNG findings probably raised expectations amongst the population of increased economic opportunity, which went unmet, which may well have been a trigger for this insurgency. Second, given the complexity of this crisis, I think it is clear that interlinked solutions really at the nexus of economic development, security sector reforms, state capacity building, humanitarian efforts, and international ventures will be required. However, we first really need to disentangle all of the geopolitical interests involved in Mozambique and the region, both from bilateral security relationships to the LNG interests, to regional interests. Only then, I think, can we hope to develop a really coherent regional international response, which at this stage, I think we're quite far off. Third, I think this would, watching this insurgency unfold over the last 3 to 5 years, it's an opportunity to ask, how responsive is our peace and security architecture to these kind of conflicts where there's rapid insurgencies that don't obey national borders, that are include opaque international interests, where there's an overlap of transnational criminal organizations and political and ideological organizations that also don't respect boundaries between regional economic communities, as in the case of northern Mozambique. And perhaps an opportunity to discuss what improvements might be made to the African Union, the general peace and security architecture. Fourth, I think there's really a lot we can be learned from close study of insurgencies in other African contexts. As Damfundo mentioned, Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda, not just in identifying where the grievances exist that give rise to insurgencies, but also in terms of timelines, how insurgencies changed over time, how different policies changed, led to different tactical changes of the organizations. For example, how strengthening border security might change the focus of an organization. There's a lot of knowledge to be mined there. However, it seems like we haven't taken the opportunity to learn from our mistakes in other African contexts, and where we have, we at least haven't turned those into actionable policies that have driven noticeable change. And then, finally, I'd like to say to again just thank the organizers for this initiative. I think if we can use this opportunity to begin to discuss a more regional, cooperative, open approach to addressing violent extremism in Southern Africa, where to date it has been very much left purely within the realm of the security sector. I think that would be a major achievement. If there's a terrorist attack in Norway, for example, you know, that you could call that a security failing, and you would look at the security sector, intelligence failing. But the insurgency in northern Mozambique was not purely a security failure. It's governance issue. It's a economic, socioeconomic issue that needs to be addressed with socioeconomic and governance responses. And I just want to make sure that that stays on the agenda and doesn't get lost when we start talking about recruitment and radicalization, what predisposes youth, etc. But I'll leave it there and hope that my colleagues can pick up the discussion further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That provides us with I think, a very solid foundation to kind of just an overview of how serious this challenge is, and also some key starting points for a debate about what the response should be, particularly from civil society, and where there is a role for regional actors and civil society to engage with this beyond just a securitized approach. So thank you very much, Stephen. That is a very useful background. Our next speaker is Professor Adriano Nuvunga, who is the Executive Director of the Center for Democratic Development in Mozambique. And Professor Nuvunga will give us provide us with his expertise from a local perspective in Mozambique, where he has clearly a more grounded engagement with these issues. Professor Nuvunga, over to you.
Okay. To be part of this important dialogue on what is happening in Mozambique and its relation to the security in the region. I don't have much to add. I mean, the colleague who spoke earlier has touched a lot on the drivers and the difficulties, but just wanted to come with a few footnotes in addition to what he has said. In this region of Cabo Delgado, it is where the liberation struggle started. And today we are celebrating our Independence Day. So it's a national holiday in Mozambique. It is the 46th anniversary of our independence. So today, 46 years ago, Frelimo was starting the liberation struggle exactly where today the insurgency is. It's a historic place. The current president is from there. It comes from a small ethnic group, the Makonde people, in the plateau part of northern Cabo Delgado. But there are issues here that speak to the legacy and its implications, the legacy of the liberation struggle, their perceptions that process, because it was led by this small, brave ethnic group, it has alienated the majority of the people that coalesce around the Ngwani ethnic group. So there's an issue of ethnicity here that needs to be considered whenever we discuss what is happening in Cabo Delgado. There have been tensions. The Makonde, they are Christian, and the Ngwani, the majority, more in the coastal part of Cabo Delgado. They are merchants, so they're historically wealthy people. They they have been neglected. They are Muslims, but they have been fairly moderate Muslims. However, with time passage and with governance failure in the form of being perceived favoring the small ethnic Christian group, ethnicity and tensions to the point that in 2006, yes, there was a by-election exactly in Mosimbo the Praia, and there were ethnic clashes there, which lasted for 2 days, and people were killing. It was brutal kind of ethnic fightings there, but it was addressed locally. Ways were found for that to stop, and campaign resumed towards the election. The election was fairly peaceful, etc. So what I'm saying is that there have been issues there. Well, again, with time passage, 2 important factors my colleague has alluded to, but let me give an emphasis here. One is that this region of Cabo Delgado, it is rich area, not only with oil and gas, but it is rich, particularly with alluvial minerals who are easily lootable. And given the lack or poorly state presence that has attracted hundreds of migrants coming from different parts of Africa to make their fortunes in that area. And the relationship between these people and the police forces and officers, it is that of kind of crime and not always following the law and order and transparent. This is one important dimension. The second one is that precisely 2005 and 6, international oil companies discovered world-class gas reserves. That has fundamentally changed the public mood in that area, and their perceptions of their condition vis-a-vis government institution and vis-a-vis governance, economic and social economic governance. With the youth starting to radicalize as they gradually perceived that the state institution was moving from a sort of absent institution to a more elite comprador type of state, where the state was gradually being perceived as the one protecting the interests of IOCs, particularly when it comes to issues of resettlement, etc. So this has also fueled and people's expectations of improving their livelihoods, as it was being announced by the leaders. Gebos at the time, they started to tell people that we are rich and that people would improve their livelihoods. But the economics of gas, of LNG, it is very expensive, it takes time. Even if good governance is there, even if governance was good, but the economics of LNG, it takes time. And expectations need to be properly managed. And if there's a failure in that, one would have problems. So this is more the socioeconomic dynamics in the region, in a context where the old leaders, old Muslim leaders, were gradually being perceived by the young as siding, as aligning with Frelimo corrupt, I would say, corrupt government system. So this is more the social fabric in that area. And with this happening, then there are issues of politics here, issues of domestic politics. I mean, one should not neglect that the politics of succession from President Gebuza to President Nyusi, that was not smooth, and it still informs governance today. But prior to this, you know that Mozambique, the previous leadership entered into the biggest ever corrupt scandal, the $2 billion illegal borrowing, again, vis-a-vis the future revenues from the oil and gas in the Rovuma Basin. And part of this money, it was used by the security, service, by the military institution to prepare companies, domestic, eyeing to have security and protection companies, contracts in the north. So powerful people who have access to power, to resources, some of these resources gained from corrupt scandals, they were used to structure ventures aiming at having contracts in the business of oil and gas. And some of these, they were stopped by President Nyusi. So what I'm saying here is that this might not have necessarily been the factor that started, but they have played an important role. And to substantiate this, I can give you two examples. The first one is when the first attacks were recorded, everyone said this is Al-Shabaab, no doubt. The patterns of the attacks and the way in which they were aggressively attacking the state institutions, people said, no, this is Al-Shabaab. But 3 to 2 months later, we started to see the vehicles of Mozambique police force being used by the so-called insurgent. And these vehicles, they were out there, and the chief commander said, yes, those were the vehicles of the state. And recently, military vehicles were again used by these insurgents to attack villages, etc. So there are dynamics here. In my view, with all this happening, there is a failure, an important failure in Mozambique military institution, and that speaks to the quality of governance and vis-a-vis the illegal debt and corruption scandal. With that said, this might have been the drivers, but with time passage, we have seen signs of these being used by the Islamic State, by the Al-Shabaab, or let me put it this way, Islamic armed groups claiming to be wanting to start a Sharia, etc. So there is, on one hand, a framework of the Islamic State being used, and gradually we are seeing signs of these moving into perhaps in a form of a franchise, wanting to build, let's say, let's say, trying to install in northern Mozambique a nucleus of an Islamic State that can then be used to expand to the region. So that's where it comes, the link comes in. So to conclude, what I'm saying is there is an important issue of domestic governance and politics here that should not be neglected. Two, there is networks of organized crime that benefit from disorder. Three, there is the politics also of international oil companies and the corporate power that needs to be addressed. So if SADC is to participate, it needs also to consider the corporate power, particularly of the international oil companies. How one of the important international oil companies, Exxon, it supported Newsy's campaign for the 2019 election. This was unprecedented in Mozambique politics, and this should not be neglected. When this was happening, we started to see a more aggressive attacks by the insurgents. So, and therefore, News had to quickly run to bring mercenary companies from Russia and then the South African mercenary companies. Issues of interests, it needs to be looked at. But with all that considered, we see a framework of ISIS, a framework of Al-Shabaab being used. Therefore, there is a need for what is happening in the north to be looked at the framework of terrorist Islamist attacks, but not neglecting that this is more internal, which kind of course is moving into of being an Islamic cell there, but it's overwhelmingly internal.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nvunga. That, I think, provides us with a very clear sense of the local nuances, and I think the very important perspective of understanding the local politics, the local economic variables that play, the actors that are involved here, that makes it clear this is very similar in terms of the overall patterns that we see elsewhere, but with a very distinct local flavor, local considerations that we need to look at when we look at interventions and solutions. So thank you very much for that. The next speaker we have is Ana Moyo, who is a program manager at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation. And Ana will be sharing some ideas about the African framework for transitional justice and what this has to offer in relation to addressing these particular challenges we face in Mozambique and in SADC. Thank you, Ana. Over to you.
Thank you, Hugo. As previous speakers have highlighted, the insurgency and violent extremism being experienced in northern Mozambique is a culmination of a number of factors. Therefore, a narrowly securitized or militarized approach to addressing the insurgency in northern Mozambique, as we have seen elsewhere as well with the Al-Shabaab, the Boko Haram insurgency elsewhere in Africa, is insufficient. Therefore, there is a need to adopt a multi-pronged approach, or what I would call a holistic approach to addressing this problem, this issue of violent extremism and insurgency in northern Mozambique, especially given its potential threat, not only to the country of Mozambique, but to the region as well. And what will this approach, for instance, looks like? The African Union Transitional Justice Policy, which was adopted by the African Union head of states and government in February 2019, gives us some tools to engage this problem and to use in using this multi-pronged or this holistic approach in addressing the problem of insurgency and violent extremism in northern Mozambique. And of course, the SADC region is part of the the African Union heads of state and heads of government that also adopted this policy, this continental policy. Just by looking at the definition of transitional justice within the policy, on page 4 of the policy, we have the definition where transitional justice is said to refer to both formal and non-formal or traditional policy measures and institutional mechanisms that societies, through an inclusive consultative process, adopt in order to overcome past violations, divisions, inequalities, and to also create conditions for security, democratic, and socioeconomic transformation. And this is important as well as another leg or as another pillar of our approach in addressing insurgency in Africa, over and above the military or the peacekeeping militarized or securitized approach, and also in complementarity with some of the issues, addressing some of the issues that Prof. Nuvunga and Stephen have highlighted before. The African Union Transitional Justice Policy offers 11 different elements of transitional justice that could be used by various member states in addressing violations, tensions, and even conflicts in either part or the whole of a country. And amongst these, I'll just highlight a few that will be useful in addressing some of the issues that are coming out as highlighted by previous speakers in northern Mozambique. Amongst the elements of transitional justice, reparations is key, where we look at symbolic reparations and material reparations. And as highlighted by Stephen earlier, that we have more than 100,000 people being internally displaced from the north due to the insurgency to date. It's important, therefore, to look at reparations as one of the key approaches to addressing the violations that victims have experienced in the north, where we look at restitution of property, land, and also engaging other processes to ensure that they go back to their places of origin, they go back to their communities and have access to the property that they owned before the insurgency. And of course, the peace process is also important, whereby we look beyond just the peace agreements or the cessation of hostilities and ceasefires, but engaging the youths as well, where we include them in the peace processes, the governance processes, exactly addressing some of the key drivers that Stephen highlighted earlier of poverty, inequality, lack of prospect, and lack of opportunities for employment that make it so much easier for them to be radicalized and to be conscripted into violent extremist groups. It's also important as well to look at reconciliation and social cohesion approaches that are aimed at addressing some of the structural inequalities in society that we see also being some of the root causes of conflict and also violent extremism in northern Mozambique. When we look at reconciliation and social cohesion, we are really looking at those strategies that are aimed at facilitating peaceful and harmonious coexistence in communities and also in society between those who were at tension previously, be it political party tensions, religious tensions, tribal tensions, ethnic group tensions, and so forth. And reconciliation is also key to building resilience amongst community members, breaching some of the divides that we see existing in communities, such as ethnic divides, political party divides, geographic divides, and many others, the religious divides amongst others. Because again, we see that conflict and even violent extremism or insurgency tend to follow some of these fault lines that exist in society and also in communities at a localized level. And also we facilitate again through reconciliation and social cohesion strategies, we facilitate processes that are aimed at building equal and violent-free societies. And also, on the other hand, we are also addressing some of the marginalization that tend to follow the very same fault lines that I spoke about earlier. Distributive justice or socioeconomic justice is also important as an approach to addressing insurgency, the root causes of insurgency, especially where, as highlighted earlier by the previous speakers, where the youths are easily radicalized because of the very issues of inequality, the very issues of lack of prospects and opportunities in their communities. Therefore, there is a need to again address issues of marginalization that exist in communities and societies by going beyond processes that are only aimed at development going forward, but also making sure that we address some of the vulnerabilities, structural vulnerabilities that existed earlier, and bring to equality some of the communities that were previously marginalized. Institutional reform also is quite key, especially around the security sector reform, the legislative reform, and also ensuring that youths are included in some of these processes going forward towards ensuring that their agency and their issues are also included, especially in key decision-making processes and in moving a country forward. Diversity management, lastly, is also quite key, especially in addressing some of the diversity deficits and the fault lines that follow diversity lines. As highlighted earlier by speakers, issues around religious diversity, the radicalization that follows religious fault lines. It will be key, therefore, to look at some of the diversity management approaches that ensure that equality and peaceful existence and equal consideration of all diverse groups in society and in communities are prioritized and also treated equally, especially when it comes to development, when it comes to governance issues, equal representation, access to resources, access to opportunities, and access to property, amongst other things. Therefore, transitional justice gives us a much broader and a more holistic approach to addressing both the root causes of conflict and the violations that are taking place during the conflict, and are worth us adopting some of these strategies to address the insurgency in northern Mozambique, not only as a national problem, but also as a problem that could easily spill over to the region, affecting and destabilizing the region. Therefore, we propose this approach, as Steve also started talking about this approach, a more peace-building and transitional justice-focused approach to addressing insurgency. And as Hugo highlighted when he started, this problem should not be underestimated, and we cannot use a merely securitized or militarized approach to dealing with it. There are so many other factors that need to be addressed, and transitional justice begins to give us some of these tools to address this problem using a multi-pronged and a more holistic approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was very succinct and I think provides a very clear sense of the framework that transitional justice provides, both as a response to the violations and how those violations need to be addressed in a victim-centered way, but also in terms of the underlying factors that need to be considered and how justice is, and the justice deficit in that context, it needs to be central to the solutions. I think what we've got is a very clear overview of the various challenges, and I think it does appear maybe a little bit overwhelming given, I think, the context that we've outlined around the economic deficits that are experienced, the governance problems that are experienced. So I think it would be, and we do want to frame this, and we want to end this discussion with a sense of the way forward, and what are the priority steps for responding to this crisis, both within SADC, but also broadly amongst the various member states. Our next speaker is Mr. Glenn Farid, who's the Executive Director and of the SADC Council for Non-Governmental Organizations. And Mr. Farid is the perfect person to address us on the SADC response to this situation. Mr. Farid, over to you.
Hi, Hugo. Glenn dropped off. I think it could be connection problems. We've tried to also contact him privately, but he hasn't seen the messages. I think we can go on to the next speaker.
Okay. Well, next in our lineup is a brief question and answer period, because I think we want to open this up for some broader discussion. We've got a fantastic collection of participants who are many of them in their own right experts on this topic. So I do want to look through if we can look at some of the questions that have already been raised. And let me just start off. I think there's been some questions and responses already, but let me turn to the question raised by Litlare Rabele, who's asked about the role of a number of questions here, the role of local communities, the question of SADC and AU early warning systems and whether those are effective and appropriate to this context, the issue of porous borders and how that in SADC has maybe exacerbated this problem. And finally also the question of access and sharing of information amongst SADC member states, and whether that is happening effectively or whether that is a problem in coordinating a response. I'm not sure who wants to take those questions. Should we take it in, any volunteers to respond?
I can give it a quick stab, and then Prof. Nfunga could perhaps add on. I think all three are really cornerstone questions. In terms of how can communities be engaged to play a role in fighting violent extremism, I think one of the challenges in northern Mozambique is that, look, an insurgency can't survive without the local population buoying it up. I think it was I think Mao Zedong said, a guerrilla insurgent is like a fish swimming in the ocean. The ocean is the community. The problem, I think, in northern Mozambique is that there's such a high level of distrust between the communities and security forces. And by security forces, I mean police, military, and the private military companies that helicopter in to guard LNG and mining facilities. So all they've ever been met with is violence when it comes to dealing with government. So, that is, you have to make it in the community's interest to support government and the security forces. There's been, that's been a hard lesson in counterinsurgency across Middle East. All international interventions, I think, over the last 10 to 20 years is that you have to get the communities on board. Secondless, in terms of SADC and AU early warning systems effectiveness, I think there's a lot that could be discussed. I think it's a challenge at the state level that then sort of cascades upwards in terms of geopolitics between states and a lack of cooperation there. For example, if Mozambique had come to SADC much earlier, then more regional and continental responses could have been operationalized earlier, I think. And that's something that it needs to be addressed nationally and then cascade upwards, I suppose. And then the third question, state security and access to information among SADC member states and non-state actors. It's also a really important point, I think, especially in Southern Africa, South Africa in particular, security discussions are very much behind closed doors and not open as it is in other contexts. Another problem, I think, is that in many countries, intelligence agencies should be the eyes and ears of a state. However, when they're sort of co-opted by an executive to really just look at the political opposition, they're not serving their function. So that is something that needs to be addressed. And then, I think I'll leave it there and let Prof. Nfunga take over.
Go ahead, Prof. You just need to unmute, Prof.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I think Stefan is absolutely right. The intelligence here has since been prepared to kind of go after first Renam, and then the more kind of all critics, so not really well prepared to address what is happening in northern Mozambique. Let me put it this way: they have started to act really, really late. Not only because of capacity issue, but also because of corruption. You know, corruption not only takes away capacity of the state institution, but it also alienates the state capacity to be used where is most needed. All signs of what was happening in the north were neglected because the state institutions were not performing their functions. And when it comes to SADC, and again, this aspect, it also it influences the dynamics of Mozambique state vis-a-vis SADC and African Union. The speed at which Mozambique leadership went to contract mercenary companies, first from Russia, and then this South African company linked to Zimbabwe. Of course, this is a path dependent. Mozambique has resorted to mercenaries since the 80s when it was fighting Renamo, but it also tells you the dynamics in relation to SADC, in relation to the African Union. The perceptions we have of SADC, you will remember that our own Thomas Salomão was the SADC General Secretary. But really, this institution is not, it does not enjoy much reputation amongst Mozambicans. It is most often absent where people need it to intervene. Although there is much interest to have a SADC, if not to directly participate, but to coordinate what would be a regional response to Mozambique. People know that SADC does not have an army, does not have capacity to do that on its own, but people have expected SADC to play that coordinating role. There is some sort of bit of disappointment for the time that is elapsing since the meeting in Harare until now. I mean, not much has happened apart from commitments to, for that support and the understanding in terms of power dynamics here. Also considering what happened in DRC when some of the regional forces were intervening, where elements of corruption and looting in DRC was taking place. So all these people factor in how they look at SADC is kind of not doing much apart from organizing that meeting. Yeah, so this is more really a territory where people have difficulties to read what is happening. Transparency is not much there. But of course, given the proximity and a good relationship between Harare and Maputo, and between Pretoria and Maputo. People have expected more swift kind of intervention from Harare and swift intervention from Pretoria in terms of supporting, but that has not happened. And then people like, what is happening here? Because and also people start to ask questions as to why, and also considering that some of these African leaders, they have their own interests, business interests. So yeah, so there are issues there that need another analysis to understand the sort of drivers for SADC not to do that much, given the plenty of evidence that, of course, there are governance issues in what is happening in Mozambique, but there is a framework, and there is a possibility of that being an Al-Shabaab and Islamist cell. That being the case, that would easily penetrate interland and South Africa, and also considering that if Mozambique is not stable, particularly with these dynamics, all region would not be stable. We understand Zim has its own internal problems, South Africa also has internal problems, but one would have expected that still they would come and aid Mozambique more quickly, and SADC to encourage that, to be playing that catalyst role, but we haven't seen that.
Thank you. I think rather than carry on with the panelists, I want to open up to some questions, and we have a number of people who've raised, and I just want to note, I think four people who've raised questions, and I'll take you in order. Jana Nube, Rebecca Ramsamy, Peter Knoop, and Clever Chikwanda. Can you, I know you've typed up some questions, but can you just briefly share your questions with the audience? So starting with Jana Nube.
Hi, Hugo. I don't see Jana anymore.
Okay. And her question was a bit broad and vague, so let me rather move on to the next one then. Rebecca Ramsamy can she unmute her?
I've unmuted her.
Hi there. I was just wondering whether governance will have changed in Mozambique since or after the coronavirus. I mean, in a lot of countries we are seeing maybe a different style of governance, if you could say that, maybe a little bit more restrictive. I'm just wondering whether Mozambique will be able to take anything away from the current experience for the conflict that is happening there at the moment.
Thank you very much. Before I take answers, let me just take the other questions. Peter Knoop.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I had a problem there to unmute myself. Well, thank you for giving me the floor. It's been fascinating presentations. Thank you. Really, really interesting. But the term violent extremism is used by several speakers. I just wanted to know, what does that mean in the terms of in the context of Mozambique? What do you mean by the term violent extremism? I hear that the government vehicles, police vehicles, army vehicles are included. Some of the interests of the private sector are part of the equation. You know, there's so many different elements that play out in this situation, the conflict, or whatever you frame it. So I was wondering what the term violent extremism exactly means in that context.
Okay, and then the last question we've got, Clever Chikwanda. Do you also want to just share your question with everybody? If we don't have Clever, I can just...
I've got Clever there. Yes, Clever.
Okay, go ahead, Clever.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this wonderful webinar, quite informative indeed. My question had to do with, well, I asked 2 questions actually. I'll be very, very quick. It's actually directed to Anna, and thank you, Anna, for the presentation on the transitional justice document, which is fairly new. I got hold of it last year after its adoption, and I actually read it twice so far. It's a beautiful, brilliant, and historic document by the African Union. My question to Anna and probably even other speakers is that to what extent has it been read? I'm talking about ordinary reading of the document. To what extent has it been read and circulated to all the stakeholders, particularly the regional economic communities? In this instance, I would want to understand the extent to which SADC understands that document, because implementation can only begin after it has been embraced by these stakeholders, particularly the SADC. Then, of course, my other question is with regards to the principle of subsidiarity. I realize that there have been some inputs with regards to the need for the African Union peace and security architecture to begin to intervene, but then, you know, the issue of subsidiarity would dictate that it is SADC which has got to intervene first. So you appreciate that SADC has come up with a very novel architecture, which is called the SADC Mediation, Conflict Prevention and Preventative Diplomacy Architecture, which I think should chip in at this moment. It has got the mediation support unit, it has got the mediation reference group, it also has got the panel of elders. So my thinking is, and of course, we're closer to that is the SADC Electoral Advisory Council. It's not part of the structure, but I think they are equally are related. My sense is that, or in fact, my question is, to what extent has this structure been involved in this conflict in Mozambique? Thank you very much.
Okay, and before I hand over to the panelists, there was one hand that's been up for a while, and I'm afraid I only have the first name, Jan from the Netherlands Embassy. Jan, do you also want to share your question?
Thank you, Hugo. Can you hear me all? Because I'm not sure if I'm unmuted. Yeah?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. And the previous speaker did provide the way for my question. And I had the privilege of working in Mozambique twice for 5 years with a period of 10 years in between. And I have seen how the undisclosed loan situation happened, how the international community at the time did not do anything with the signals that something was not correct, not right. I have seen how the initial signs for conflict, violent extremism, whatever we want to give it in northern Mozambique started, and yet we chose not to react on these early signals, early warning signals. Why is that? Why have we not been able to turn early warning into early action? So I'm wondering whether we have the right discussion. Should we not reflect, and the previous speaker asked about the peace and security architecture? Is that correct? Because we constantly work from the basis of sovereignty of states. So we don't want to criticize states. If you see what happened, and I'm not blaming anybody, that the UK is now saying we should help the the Mozambican government. But what if the government does play a role in the whole situation? What does that lead us to? So that is my question. Should we not rethink the entire peace and architectural system with which we approach this question? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have so many big questions, and we clearly are running out of time to address them all in any detail. And we have more people asking questions and putting their hands up. And I think just as a last, or probably more as a response, I think we have Professor Maklosa, who is well positioned to address particularly the question of the TJ policy and the role of the AU and SADC. So I just want to ask Professor Maklosa to perhaps respond to that particular question. And then I'll hand over to the panelists for some brief responses.
Am I audible, Hugo?
Yes, we can hear you. Speak up a bit.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. First and foremost, let me really thank the organizers of this very, very informative seminar today. And part of the reason I wanted to really be on this platform is because this issue is not only close to my heart since I come from the region, but it's an issue that the African Union is also beginning to grapple with in a big way. I'm talking from Addis, Ethiopia, where I am now, with the African Union, and a number of speakers have made reference to the African Union. That's why I thought I should chip in. But first and foremost, thank the panelists. A very, very informative analysis, discussion, and I agree with them. Before I get to the questions, Hugo, that frankly, and the three of them have harped on this issue, that the political economy approach is the best for understanding what's going on in Cabo Delgado. And that is probably also the approach that we can use to understand the tragedy of terrorism throughout the continent. We've talked about northeastern Nigeria, we talked about Somalia, we talked about the Sahel belt. So I think the political economy approach is the best, so that we don't see the problem as a security problem requiring a security solution. So I agree with that. So there's a lot of socioeconomic dynamics that we need to unravel. So I want to agree with the panelists. Second, Chair, your question about, and this has come also in the presentations, the relationship between the African Union and regional economic communities is a very complex one. It's a complex relationship. It gets complicated by this principle. Somebody referred to principle of subsidiarity and complementarity, which means that if a regional economic community does not address a problem in its area of jurisdiction, the AU's hands are tied. We cannot enter. That explains in part why this important issue happening in northern Mozambique, which also has ramifications for the region, has not been on the agenda of the AU Peace and Security Council as we speak now. It does not. It does not. It has a lot to do with the fact that the SADC has not yet taken the issue up and also be in a position to refer to the African Union. That's why we have a problem. Now, this principle is a double-edged sword. It's a double-edged sword. In some regions, it works well. In West Africa, for example, with ECOWAS, we work very well with ECOWAS. ECOWAS does not even wait to tackle the issue head on. They call SADC immediately. Take the case of the Gambia. We worked with ECOWAS from the beginning to the end to resolve the issue of the Gambia, even transitional justice issues in the Gambia. We worked with ECOWAS from the word go. But in other regions like SADC, we have a problem where a REC is not proactive in taking up issues. The AU's hands are tied. But where a REC is proactive, like in ECOWAS, then we work smoothly. I wanted to answer that question about subsidiarity and also the issue of how it becomes a double-edged sword. Now, TJ, and I want to thank Anna for tabling it so well. Transitional justice policy in Africa it's one of our best instruments that we've developed in tackling, peace building, post-conflict reconstruction, reconciliation, and social harmony. And Anna has done an excellent job describing it. Now, what is important now is that we should, promote the policy in a big way through RECs, among others, through civil society organizations, some of whom are on this platform, and through think tanks like CDD in Mozambique. My good friend Adriano would play an important role in that in Mozambique, for example. So it hopes on us working together with CSVR and IGR as well, that we should promote this policy, make it known, publicize it, institutions like SADC should also have it. SADC CNGO should also have it. So it's a collective responsibility for all of us. And I think it can really play a big role in our quest for stabilizing the situation in northern Mozambique. Thank you, Hugo.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think, so as a final kind of wrap up with the panel before we hand over to our final speakers to wrap up today, I think there's been some very specific questions that you could respond to if you could just take in 2 minutes maximum, because we're already coming to the end of the scheduled time and we still need to accommodate the final wrap up. So can we just go from well, the various speakers. Stephen, do you have any specific responses to the questions that were raised?
Sure, thanks, Hugo, and thank you everyone for the questions. Maybe I'll just run through them really quickly. Like you said, 2 minutes in reverse order. Jan mentioned that the question around reevaluating the sort of peace and security architecture, and I think that's a really important point to stress, especially in light of really increasingly complex and fragile conflict systems. We need to really interrogate, I think, if not just the question of subsidiarity, which Prof. Matlosa really, I think, encapsulated very succinctly, but even the way we understand conflict, our norms that govern relationships, or security relationships around states, our relationship between, intelligence, security sector, and civil society, all of those things, because if we recognize that this can't be addressed by security sector alone, then we need to take the next step and, okay, well, then how do we really get security sector and civil society engagement? And there's a lot of important discussion that I think we could take further. In terms of how we define violent extremism in the Mozambican context, I think it's a great question, and it's an ongoing one. It is a messy topic, messy term, violent extremism. At least for me, in Mozambique, it's hard to call a kid who has no prospects of employment being recruited by Al-Sunnah as an extremist, in my opinion. There may be parts of the leadership who have a much more ideological cause, who are affiliated to ISIS, who want to raise what is essentially a socioeconomic grievance into a sort of cosmic realm like ISIS does. And when they do that, as is seen in Al-Shabaab, for example, it makes it very, very difficult for political negotiations. It taps the insurgency into global jihadist networks, funding, etc. So I think it is a very good point to keep that in mind when we throw around terms like extremists, and I won't address governance changes in Mozambique post Corona. I think the Prof is probably much better positioned to answer that if he has the moment. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Nuvunga, you can probably talk directly to the present context of COVID and how that affects governance.
Thank you so much. Well, when it comes to how to define extremism, well, I've seen brutality by the insurgents. Since the beginning, there have been about 400 attacks, of which around 1/3 are targeted to state and private institutions and buildings. And also, we have seen attack to the premises of a Catholic Church institution. But the bulk of the attacks are targeting villages. And we are conducting interviews with IDPs in the region. I mean, they're telling narratives of brutality by this. So one would wonder how and why this group is being so brutal to villagers. But at the same time, they exhibit footage of them being welcomed by communities, etc. So there was an important trigger event, which was the 2019 election. And then we witnessed more confidence and also an expansionist perspective in terms of territory, but also in terms of moving towards Pemba. So, but after that trigger event, where they were targeting more state institutions, then they started to attack villagers, creating much havoc there. There, the pattern is that of what we have seen from the 16-year civil war, with villagers being targeted and some of them being killed, murdered, etc. So it is this mix of tactics that we see from the Al-Shabaab elsewhere, moving around in the town, recording amateur videos showing them attacking, etc., with messaging, but also with them creating havoc in the middle of the night into communities. In relation to how COVID-19 has impacted governance and the spirit of the leadership here, we haven't seen much change. We haven't seen literally change. Neither in terms of governance, how government is positioning itself in terms of responding, or the policy coherence to respond to COVID-19, and how the state machinery is moving into that direction to tap or to close important gaps, because it has been clear now that the state was absent in terms of social protection, in terms of key infrastructure. It has been absent, and you don't see that. People would have expected that Mozambique would change the paradigm, the perspective, but that has not changed. At the first sign, they quickly rushed to the IMF to ask a loan. Mozambique is already in debt distress, but they have found fiscal space to go there, and again, using the future revenues from the Rovuma Basin to get that money today, and it is not being used. We issued a statement yesterday asking, where is that money being used? So this is further problems to the ones that we have today. And Cabo Delgado now is becoming the epicenter of COVID-19, because with the insurgency, there is no state capacity to address, and the people cannot follow the social distancing, use masks, because they are facing a much life-threatening risk than COVID-19. State also is not there. So we are nearly witnessing a humanitarian crisis in Cabo Delgado, which is moving to Nampula now with about 200,000 IDPs moving to northern Nampula. And most of these, they cannot do social distancing. The state cannot protect any kind of social protection. And these people, they cannot stay. So not only was not change, state is not there, and the skyrocketing numbers of COVID-19 also speak to the absence of the state, structural absence, but also because of the insurgency, the state is unable to reach out to those communities and provide the very little that was possible.
Thank you very much. Finally, Anna, do you have any particular responses? Just keeping in mind that we need to move on because we are losing participants who clearly have other commitments. And some final words from you.
Thank you, Hugo. Thank you, Hugo. Prof. Matlosa answered the most of the questions around the AU-TJP and the role of the AU in regional RECs. Maybe just my last point would be to say that the African Union is actually leading the process of popularizing the African Union transitional justice policy with the RECs and also with civil society, the think tanks, the academia, and other stakeholders. This was done in 2019 already. The East Africa, Southern Africa, and West Africa regions already had consultations around the AU-TJP, and a lot more is still in the pipeline, where the African Union will be leading this continent-wide popularization of the policy.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for being brief. We now kind of move into just a reflection by Dr. Webster Zambara, a senior project leader at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, just to reflect on the next steps and future stakeholder collaboration that we hope to see emerging in the near future. Webster, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I should just start by saluting Mozambique on its Independence Day by saying Viva la Independencia, the people, the Mozambicano. I think SADC should deliberately prioritize sovereign security with equal measure with human security so that we combat this insurgency through one, containment of the militarization that has already taken place, but also this should be supported by building local capacity for sustained dialogue, mediation, and transitional justice that promote peace and sustainable inclusive development. We should also, we are going as civil society, working with other partners, we're going to continue to look at the gendered nature of the atrocities that are already happening, particularly the sexual violence against women and girls that should be investigated thoroughly so that victims get all the support needed while perpetrators are brought to justice. And it's historical. Mozambique has 16 years of civil war, and this has left the country traumatized, and violence leaves nations and communities traumatized. So there should be a process to deal with mental health problems that are emanating out of this insurgency. And these atrocities that are committed would need enough psychosocial support for victims in all their rehabilitation processes if we are going to guarantee and sustain peace. The other issue that is going to be on the table is the recognition and use of local knowledge and community intelligence, I would say. And this would be important to build and strengthen local capacity to resist recruitment and rehabilitate victims. And in other words, we need to build community resilience using local approaches of peace and security that are prevalent in communities in northern Mozambique. We also should ensure meaningful participation of women in all processes to resolve the Mozambican insurgents in particular, and peace process in SADC region. This would include participation in the implementation of any peace agreements that would come out of this, because the elitist programs and pacts will always have problems trickling down to the communities. And all these would require funding, particularly to institutions like IGR and CSVR. We have organized this meeting, and if they can leverage their combined experience working in some of Africa's hottest spots like South Sudan, Burundi, Zimbabwe, Central African Republic, to pursue transitional justice, peace and reconciliation in Mozambique, and peace and reconciliation in Southern Africa. And I don't want to reiterate a very important fact that just like the independence of Mozambique in 1974 was a catalyst to the independence of Zimbabwe, Namibia, and South Africa, the civil war in Mozambique, 16-year civil war, also involved this whole region, with leaving 1 million people dead. This insurgency cannot be historically incorrect. It's going to follow the same path, so we need to act and act now. And in this regard, because of time constraints, the role of civil society to continue to work, hopefully in more partnership with SADC, because at the moment we are not seeing SADC as the political side of it being active on this issue, even though it is now an emergence that everyone is seeing. We need to continue shouting, and we continue programming in a way that puts the people of Mozambique and the people of Southern Africa at the forefront for justice and inclusivity. I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very succinct and very strong statement of the need for the way forward, and emphasizing very clearly the need for civil society collaboration with state parties in SADC, which I think is something we're still struggling to pursue effectively, but is very much on the agenda and part of our activities that are already underway. So that just leaves me to ask Dr. Stan Henkemann of the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, the Executive Director of the Institute, to make some concluding remarks. Stan, over to you.
Hugo, thank you. Correction, I am Stan Henkemann, not Dr. Stan Henkemann. Maybe that's a prophecy you...
It's an honorary doctorate.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much. Oh, I think today we were really, really privileged to be part of such a rich conversation. And I think the panelists have really, really done well in not only shaping the conversation, but also giving us very practical pointers towards how to deal with the issue. And I've made copious notes, and I think that, if I had an hour, I would not be able to do justice. My job is simply just to conclude this really rich conversation. And please allow me to say that what came out very, very clearly for me was what we're seeing in northern Mozambique is can largely be attributed to a failure of governance. And when that happens, the level of marginalization and exclusion, opens up opportunities for all kinds of negative influences. And we certainly see that in northern Mozambique. What is at play here, and Anna, you spoke about the transitional AU transitional justice framework, which I think is a really, really good document to use as a point of departure, and particularly the idea of how do you build social cohesion, and it's it's probably more relevant to talk about building social cohesion, and then reconciliation will follow that. And in Mozambique, what you see there are three key things, really being negatively affected, and that's identity, inequality, and trust. The question around identity, or the lack of recognition of identity, the big massive inequalities that we've heard about, and Stephen really gave us a picture of what's going on, and Dr. Nvunga similarly. And then of course the lack or the absence of trust. Those are key elements that you need for social cohesion, and they are absent within the Mozambican context. And so the question that I'm sitting with, and I think it's a question that we all have to grapple with, is it's all good to have policy responses and to advocate for structural changes and all of that. But ultimately the question should be, how do we shift these paradigms that you're talking about, Dr. Nvunga? How do you shift that? How do you shift the attitudes that give rise to these kinds of insurgents? And how do you minimize and ultimately eradicate the driving forces of these things. Unless we do it, we deal with that question, it doesn't matter how many good policies we have. It doesn't matter, you know, what governments do, what regional governments do, or continental bodies do. We need to shift the material, lived experiences of people. That is at the heart of the matter. And I think that organizations like the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation and CSVR are well placed to do that kind of thing, because that's at the heart, certainly, of the work that we do. It's shifting these attitudes, these worldviews, and so forth. So let me thank our panel for really you know, going the extra mile to give us quality inputs, and let me start in the order in which they presented. Stephen Buchanan Clark, thank you very much. Really insightful points you raised, and particularly those 5 points that you left us for consideration. I think they are really meaningful. Thank you very much. Dr. Nvunga, you too added a rich texture, a local texture to your presentation, and gave us a real sense of some of the drivers that you observe from the inside. You know, the ethnicity factors, the domestic politics, how failure of governance, you know, affect the situation there. The role of the Islamic State and so forth. And I found that really, really useful, because, you know, that takes the conversation from a mere theoretical conversation to really touching the real issues on the ground. Anna, you know, punted for us the 11 elements of the AU transitional justice policy. And I do think that you know, the other speakers who also spoke about the TJ policy, there's a lot in there for us to work from. And I hope that it is not just going to be one that is going to be popularized by people, but it is something that all of us will work towards getting people on the ground, like in northern Mozambique, to feel the positive effects of something like that. Pardon. Hugo, let me thank you for before I get to Hugo, Webster, really good summary there, excellent and concise, appreciate it. And Hugo, thank you for steering the ship so well, and for accommodating everybody, even though we ran over time. The other contributors in terms of who asked questions and made comments, we are really, really grateful for your contribution to all of this. And then for all of those people who have attended, and we've lost some people, but I think it's the quality of the panel and the attendees that have made this a really, really good conversation. Thank you, CSVR, for organizing this. We look forward to future collaborations. Thank you to the donors who made this possible. Thank you to the Diplomatic Corps for your interest in all of this. All of you are friends of both organizations, and long may the relationship last. Thank you so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day, and let's continue to look for solutions.
Thank you very much, Stan, and we'll end it there. Goodbye, everybody.